The rain drummed monotonously on the roof, tapping out a rhythm known only to itself on the lilac leaves, making them quiver in that hidden cadence. Nancy stood by the open studio window, listening to the rain and smoking, trying to calm her anxiety. An hour earlier she had received a call from a prominent local gallerist who offered her a chance to exhibit her work. In a fashionable, prestigious art club, he was planning to show pieces by up-and-coming painters. 2 or 3 paintings. Choose them yourself. I trust your taste. Nancy kept replaying his words in her mind, savouring them again and again. Finally, a real opportunity had come along for her to make a name for herself. People would see her work, and with a stroke of luck, that might mean sales. They agreed to meet and discuss the details tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Her phone buzzed on the windowsill, announcing a long-awaited message. Your order will be delivered today at 6 p.m. The sender was listed as someone named Summers, but the number information was hidden. Well, I didn't really want your number anyway, Nancy muttered, ignoring that odd detail. She was too caught up in excitement. At last she'd be getting the ring she'd been wanting. And she could wear it to the exhibition. No one would remain indifferent to such a piece. That morning, while browsing her favourite website for online boutiques, Nancy had stumbled upon a shop with the amusing name Whim. The owner, a certain Summers, was offering an array of stylish little items, veiled hats, brooches, bracelets and other vintage trinkets. Amid the colourful variety of baubles, one unusual ring caught her eye. Its design was simple, a blackened band with a minimalistic look, but the stone itself astonished her. It reminded Nancy of ancient cliffs, hiding millennia-old secrets in their caves. It seemed charged with a primordial strength and power. The longer Nancy stared at the ring, the stronger its magnetism grew. Under a sudden impulse, she decided to buy it. She messaged the shop owner, discussed the details, and without delay wired the money to the provided account. They promised to deliver the ring that very day, and so they did. At exactly 6, the doorbell rang. Without hesitation, Nancy opened the door and found herself taken aback by the sight of the courier, if he was indeed a courier at all. He looked like a character from a children's movie. Tall, thin, all angles and bends, with a constant smile on his face. His small eyes shone with benevolence. He wore an old-fashioned suit, complete with a bow tie and a felt beret, which added to his peculiar appearance. "My dear lady, I believe I startled you." "Do forgive me." He gave Nancy a ceremonious bow and handed her a small parcel wrapped in dark paper. A shiny sticker on top bore the vintage shop's logo. "Is this yours? I found it on the doormat." "Yes, it's mine." "But, so you're not the courier?" "Courier?" The stranger rolled his eyes theatrically. "Perish the thought, my lady. Absolutely not. I've come here on personal business. I'm longing to commission a painting from you. May I?" And gently nudging her aside, he slipped into her home. "Have you seen my work? Who recommended me to you? How did you get my address? Why would you come without calling first?" Nancy fired off her irritated questions at the man's back like darts. She disliked unexpected visits from clients, preferring to schedule appointments in advance. Her odd visitor was entirely unruffled by her annoyance. Still smiling and rubbing his hands together, he began some vague chatter about mutual acquaintances who had recommended this young, promising artist to him. Nancy eyed him without shame, barely listening to his long-winded speech. Suddenly, to her own surprise, she suggested, "Would you like me to paint your portrait? You have such a striking appearance." "Striking? My appearance? Which one?" "Ah, yes," the guest exclaimed, as if recalling something, and then gave a guilty little giggle, adjusting his pince-nez. "My dear lady, let's set that aside. I have a different sort of commission for you. How shall I put it?" He wiggled his long fingers in the air, as if searching for the right words. "You see, I'm a dedicated collector, and what I collect are human fears." Noting how Nancy's face fell, The stranger smiled in a reassuring way. Don't get the wrong idea. I simply collect paintings that carry a certain mood, yes, a specific emotional charge. I'm afraid you won't get very far with me, Nancy interrupted. I only do portraits and landscapes, and I live a quiet, uneventful life. All of us have a few small secrets and fears. Admit it, I'm not wrong, the stranger said excitedly, licking his lips before suddenly letting out a small hiccup. You won't get anywhere with me, Nancy repeated firmly, wishing to get rid of this oddball as soon as possible. Don't be hasty in refusing me. Think about it. Have you really never felt frightened of anything? Maybe something scared you as a child. Or perhaps it comes to you in your dreams. The images born of our subconscious can be quite vivid, even if they seem pointless or illogical. My past holds nothing strange, Nancy shrugged as casually as she could. I guess I'm just a dull person. Not even in childhood, not in childhood nor now, and yet don't turn me down right away. At least try. I trust your taste and your artistic intuition. He named a sum large enough to make Nancy's head spin. It was hard to say no, so she agreed to think it over. All right, I'll try, maybe. But I still don't understand what you want to see in this painting. Just paint whatever stirs you most, the stranger said. He fished a business card out of his pocket and laid it on the table. Call me tomorrow and let me know your final decision. I'll be waiting. Once she finally got rid of the pesky visitor, Nancy was able to unwrap the ring. In real life, it looked even more unusual and eye-catching than in the photo. A large, opaque gemstone of deep black drew her in. Its rough surface was crisscrossed with tiny cracks and ridges, warm to the touch. Nancy gently stroked the stone, then slipped the ring onto the ring finger of her right hand. It fit perfectly, sliding into place as though embracing her finger. In high spirits, Nancy headed to her studio. She picked a canvas of just the right size from her stash, mounted it on the easel, and stepped back, scrutinizing it. The canvas had been stretched, primed, and was ready to use. Nancy tapped its taut surface lightly. It gave a responsive little vibration, as if inviting her to begin. What would satisfy that bizarre little man? What might frighten him? Too bad I didn't ask for photos of the other paintings in his collection, she thought. He must have them somewhere, maybe in a gallery. She spent a while trying in vain to come up with a scary theme. Horror stories had never appealed to her, so she decided to browse the internet for inspiration. After scrolling through a series of unpleasant images and creepy scenarios, she wound up with a headache and gave up until morning. Nancy slept badly. In that half-lit space between dreams and waking, she saw black shadows flitting all around her, touching her hair and face with tendril-like wisps of fog, whispering unintelligible things. Then the stranger appeared among them, watching her intently, rubbing his hands together and murmuring, "My dear lady, you mean to say you're not afraid of anything? Absolutely nothing?" Nancy tried to reply but was unable to speak, and the shadows drew closer, looming over her with unsettling little giggles. She woke at dawn, disoriented. She had no appetite for breakfast, and her imagination seemed paralyzed. Smoking a quick cigarette and pacing aimlessly around the room, she decided to get something done, specifically to photograph a few of her favorite paintings, the ones she planned to propose for the show. The pale morning light barely illuminated the studio. Something dangerous, lurking and hostile suddenly seemed to hover in the familiar surroundings, thickening in the corners, seeping into the very air. Shaking off the feeling, Nancy switched on the overhead light and stepped towards the easel, then froze in place, unable to believe her eyes. On the previously blank canvas, a drawing had appeared overnight. Almost the entire canvas was dominated by a chair, sketched in charcoal with only the basic form of the high back detailed. It seemed to be floating in mid-air, lacking any clear anchor on the floor. Sitting on it, near the edge, legs dangling and body slumped to one side, was a small doll. Unlike the rough charcoal chair, the doll was painted in full colour, rendered so finely and precisely that it looked real, a tangible toy. Amazement overshadowed her fear for a moment. Someone must have broken in last night to make this picture, but who? How had they entered? Why? And most baffling, how was it even possible? Nancy rushed to the window. The fancy latch was still firmly locked, the two wooden frames snugly sealed. She dashed out of the room to check the front door, then the windows in her bedroom and kitchen. Everything looked as it should, no sign of an intruder. Then what was this? How did the drawing get there? Racked with nerves, Nancy returned to the studio and took another look at the painting. There was something unsettling, even ominous, about the doll. At the same time, something vaguely familiar tugged at her memory. The more Nancy studied the doll, the more her confusion grew, spreading through every cell of her body. There was no mistake. The doll painted on the canvas was the one from her childhood. It had glossy celluloid arms and legs attached to a cloth torso stuffed with wadding. Across the front of that fabric torso was a patch of bright blue floral calico. Nancy recognized it instantly. Closing her eyes for a moment, she hoped the image would vanish, but of course it remained. Years ago, Nancy had found that doll in the attic of her grandmother's old house. She disliked it from the start. She couldn't fathom why the adults all praised and admired it, remarking how special it was, the kind of toy that needed to be cherished. With great ceremony, they set the doll on a shelf amidst various souvenirs and dried flower vases. It sat there with its blank expression, apparently indifferent. But little Nancy was convinced that the doll was watching her. She would catch that malevolent, piercing gaze no matter where she went. Eventually, she started hiding the doll behind the couch cushions, laying it face down. The doll rested prone, arms and legs outstretched. If Nancy stared long enough, she'd swear it was trying to move, trying to push itself up on all fours. Nancy's sleep became disturbed. Every little noise made her jump, but she felt too embarrassed to tell the adults that some old doll frightened her. They probably wouldn't have understood her fear, since they all loved the vintage toy. Nancy tried accidentally leaving the dreaded doll on a park bench or forgetting it at a store, but the small-town busybodies always recognized her, calling her back to return the doll. This went on until Nancy finally buried it in a far corner of her grandmother's overgrown garden. The doll was sought after, with much fuss at first, but people eventually gave up once they realized it was gone for good. Over the years, Nancy had pushed that unnerving childhood incident from her mind. Yet now it came rushing back in perfect clarity. Who could possibly know about the doll? Who had ever seen it, let alone reproduced it so precisely on a canvas? Feeling helpless and small, Nancy kept staring at the painting and absently stroking the large stone on her new ring. The moment she touched that rough surface, an unexpected sense of relief swept over her, a soothing warmth flooding her body, making the bizarre event feel more like a minor inconvenience. I'll deal with it later, she decided dully, and that thought calmed her enough to move on to her planned tasks. Nancy spent longer than anticipated at her meeting with the gallerist, then stopped by her friend Stacy's cosy little cafe. Stacy, who was always keen on jewellery, examined Nancy's latest purchase with surprise. "That's the ring you've been raving about?" she asked with a grimace. "I don't believe you. You've got to be kidding me," Nancy replied with a string of enthusiastic exclamations, praising the stone's originality, the style, the elegance of the ring. "This doesn't look like your style at all. It's more like a men's ring." "Why on earth would you be attracted to a big chunk of coal and such a Spartan design?" Stacy wondered, reaching out. "Let me see it up close." But no matter how Nancy tried, she couldn't remove the piece. It was stuck fast, firmly gripping her ring finger. "That's weird. It went on so easily." "Maybe my hand's swollen. I've had it on since yesterday." "Don't worry. You can get it off with some soap. I'll swing by your place in a day or two, then I'll have a closer look," Stacy said reassuringly, switching the subject. They chatted over tea and delicious pastries about Nancy's bright prospects with the upcoming exhibit. They tossed around small talk on other matters. Nancy was dying to tell her friend about the morning's unsettling occurrence, but couldn't quite muster the courage. Eventually she blurted out, "Stacy, something bizarre happened to me today." At those words, a sharp pain lanced through her ring finger, and the ring felt heavier, pulling her hand down. Gasping, Nancy clutched at it, reflexively running her thumb over the stone. Her mind turned sluggish, her thoughts jumbled. "So what happened?" Stacy asked, eyeing her curiously as Nancy fussed with the ring. "Oh, nothing really," Nancy said vaguely. "Stacy, I should probably get going. I've got a new commission to think about, and it's getting late." "You're acting odd today," Stacy observed, narrowing her eyes. "Is everything okay? You're not hiding something?" "No, it's fine. Come by and see me soon, okay?" When Nancy arrived home, she went straight to the studio, secretly hoping she would find the easel empty. But the painting was still there, and the image on the canvas had changed. The doll was in a new position, now sitting back in a relaxed pose, leaning against the high chair back. A thin silver chain gleamed around its neck, clearly too big for the doll, hanging low off the seat and disappearing out of sight. Nancy's heart skipped a beat, then started racing. She reached out and touched the image, perfectly dry. Typically, oil paints take a while to dry. Logically speaking, this had to have been painted long ago, but what logic could explain anything that was happening to her right now? Her body alternately flared with heat and shivered with cold. She gasped for air, rushing to the window and yanking the stubborn latch open. Warm air blew in, ruffling her hair, filling her lungs with the scent of lilacs. Nancy inhaled hungrily, trying to steady herself and piece her thoughts together. What is going on right now? Why am I seeing these strange visions? Am I actually going insane? Calm down, stay calm, she begged herself. She had to do something, but what? What? A faint rustle behind her boomed like thunder in the silence. Nancy spun around to see something long and gleaming on the floor beneath the easel. It was the chain from the painting, and dangling from it was a heart-shaped locket with a small blue stone in the center. Almost in a trance, Nancy crouched down and picked up the tiny, weightless necklace. She ran a finger over the heart-shaped pendant, automatically pressing the little clasp on the left side. "This is for your happiness, my dear granddaughter. The blue stone will bring you luck." Her grandmother's voice seemed to echo in her head. A gentle click, and the locket split into two halves. It was the old heirloom from her grandmother, forgotten ages ago, lost that same summer. A long-buried memory came rushing back. The child Nancy, hands all dirty, lowering the doll into the shallow hole, bending closer to shove it deeper to the bottom. The chain slipped off her neck, following the doll down into the dirt. Nancy tried to grab it, but it was caught on the doll's hand. It seemed to her that the doll was gripping it on purpose, refusing to let it go. Sobbing in fear, little Nancy hurriedly covered the hole, leaving the locket down there with the doll. Yet now the locket lay in her palm, open and warm, so real, so present. Unless she was just hallucinating, was all of this imaginary? The locket, the painting, that strange customer? What if the entire experience was just her subconscious playing tricks on her? She ought to simply force herself to break free of the illusions, a mere act of will, and it would all vanish. Come on, come on. Nancy squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, then looked up. The canvas loomed before her as though about to press down on her. From its surface, filling nearly the entire painting, the doll's face stared at her, huge and unmoving, the expression blank, yet its painted blue eyes appeared alive, aware and malevolent. Instead of screaming, Nancy let out only a ragged rasp. Dropping the locket, she dashed out of the studio. She slammed the door and leaned against it, struggling to breathe. Her pulse thundered, echoing in her head. Panic overwhelmed her. She couldn't focus, couldn't think. She pinched her arm hard enough to bruise, and the pain momentarily sharpened her wits. "I should call Stacy right away." As if in response, Nancy's phone began to ring. The jaunty pop tune she used as her ringtone felt mocking and intrusive, coming from somewhere on the other side of that door. She had left her cell in the studio. How careless! She didn't want to go back in, but she needed to answer that call. She was desperate to talk to someone, anyone. Feeling close to fainting from fear, her legs trembling beneath her, Nancy slowly inched back into the room. The locket was gone. The phone kept playing its cheerful tune, the screen glowing with an unknown caller ID. Without hesitation, Nancy answered, "Hello?" Then she pivoted, staring at the easel. The painting had reverted back to the original version, an old doll, legs dangling, slumping on the edge of the chair. "Hello? Can you hear me, my dear lady?" said the caller, his voice slicing through the fog of numbness gripping Nancy. "I'm sorry to bother you. I happened to be near your home and couldn't resist greeting you. Have you thought about my proposal? Will you agree to paint the piece? It's already done." "Come and get it," Nancy blurted out, words tumbling out before she could think. "Already?" he repeated. "That's so unexpected, but I'm pleased, very pleased. Will you let me in?" Moments later he was in her studio, surveying the painting with a critical eye. "I like it very much indeed. The concept isn't entirely original, but the execution is superb. The doll is delightful. She looks like a little live girl, a very displeased one." He gave a subdued chuckle. That smile is so off-putting, so insincere, Nancy thought suddenly, and his gaze so keen and hard. But she only said aloud, "This doll can't possibly look like a girl. She has a cloth body and plastic arms and legs. If you're pleased with the painting, take it now." "Oh, but you don't find her charming? You're afraid of her?" The client rubbed his hands contentedly. Nancy had no desire to discuss it with him. "Are you satisfied with it? Will you take the painting? I'm fine with half the original fee." "Alas, no, dear lady. The painting isn't finished. It needs a slight adjustment. You see, it's missing a crucial detail, something very important to the story. I don't understand." Nancy's voice rose to a near shout in her desperation to be rid of the awful thing. "Take it as a gift, please. Just take it." He shook his head, giving her a reproachful look. "My dear lady, you're exhausted. You managed to create such a marvelous piece in just one night. Am I right? Sit here for a moment." He guided her to a chair by the window, briefly holding onto her hand. "What a remarkable ring you're wearing. Very old and very rare." "You're mistaken," Nancy said. "It's just an inexpensive ring, probably a knockoff. I never make mistakes, my dear lady. Believe me, this ring has a rare, extremely rare stone called Morion. It's drawn to people of unusual gifts, opening doors to other realities. You're quite lucky. Rest a bit and finish your painting. I'll wait outside." With that, he backed toward the door. Nancy again found herself gazing at the stone. Its heavy warmth lulled her into a haze, wrapping her thoughts in a thick cloud. She wanted to ask him to stay, to plead for his help, but she couldn't form the words, and by the time she emerged from her stupor, he was gone. She rose and walked unsteadily to the easel. The image had changed again. Now the doll dangled from the chair's back, the locket chain drawn into a tight noose around its neck. Nancy stared, unable to tear her eyes away, watching as the painted figure began to sway left to right, like a pendulum. Its movement grew faster, the doll seeming to drift by her in a mocking dance, never taking its painted eyes off her. Sobbing with terror, barely aware of her actions, Nancy grabbed a tube of bright turquoise paint and squeezed thick ribbons of pigment directly onto the canvas. Smears of paint gradually covered everything. The chair, the locket's noose, that despised old doll. "That's it," she thought with desperate relief. The sense of release was so intense it almost made her nauseous. Nancy sank to the floor, hands shaking. The stone of the ring dug painfully into her palm as though it might bite her. Plop. A shriveled fleck of turquoise paint landed at her feet. Plop, plop, plop. Small dried lumps pattered to the ground. On the canvas, right before her eyes, something unbelievable was happening. The paint peeled off in strips as if an invisible hand were ripping it from the surface, rolling and dropping it in little wads on the floor. Plop, plop, plop went the crumpled flakes. Plop, plop, plop. With grim inevitability, the chair, the doll, and its bright blue patch re-emerged from beneath the peeled paint. The rest of the world disappeared. Nothing existed now but that terrifying painted doll, shining with a cloying grin, staring unblinkingly into Nancy's eyes, its pink arms stretched forward as though about to embrace her. "No!" Nancy heard her own voice as if it belonged to someone else. She lunged for her palette knife and stabbed the painting once, twice, 3 times. The surface shimmered and rippled like a bog. Some force shoved Nancy forward, pressing her into the thick depths of the canvas, dragging her down, refusing to let go. Marvellous, outstanding, absolutely brilliant. The strange man in the beret materialized out of thin air in the studio. "Well done, my dear lady. Now the painting is complete. My collection gains another unique, one-of-a-kind masterpiece," he crowed, dancing a small celebratory jig near the easel. From the canvas, Nancy gazed at him. Terror and despair were frozen in her eyes. Trapped in the painted world with no hope of moving or escaping, she tried to scream, but no sound emerged from her contorted mouth. The hateful doll clutched her hand tight. Nancy watched as the man bent down and picked up the ring that had slipped off her finger. She saw him caress the stone and murmur something to it. "Don't be lonely. I'll find you a new owner soon," she faintly heard him say. Then everything went dark. Please write in the comments, support the video with a like, and of course subscribe to the channel. How can also share this video with your friends. They will probably also be interested.